Alex, important things of the day: Bitcoin $115,000, and most importantly, the stock above the euro again. What's the sentiment? What's going on? What's your view? What's the analysis? What's the everything?
Fiat is going to zero. Bitcoin has no top because it has a fixed supply, and Fiat has not a fixed supply. And the Bitcoin treasury companies are going through the roof in that context over time. They are also experiencing a lot of volatility, and we have seen that over the summer. All I have seen is a lot of weakness, a lot of doubt, a lot of fear, a lot of uncertainty. At Capital B, we are Bitcoin maximalists. We are focused on the long-term accumulation of Bitcoin, and we are completely focused on maximizing Bitcoin per share. Over the
Uh,
last 5 months, we have doubled the number of Bitcoin on the balance sheet, doubled the number of sats per share. Over 6 months, Bitcoin is up 20%, Capital B is up 40%, and year to date, Bitcoin is up also 20%, and Capital B is up 200%. And so the state of the market is that Bitcoin is being accumulated at scale by institutions. Everyone around me is planning to accumulate more Bitcoin, not selling it. And so there is a supply and demand shock right now.
Alex, this is so interesting, and thank you for mentioning it. Is this the right way and only way to measure and price to measure the price action of Bitcoin treasury companies, like outpacing Bitcoin? You just said you've been up 200% and Bitcoin 20, which essentially is a 180% up in Bitcoin terms. So, is this the only and right way to denominate and understand treasury companies, or you think that we should be pricing them the returns and so on in dollars?
So it depends on the time horizon. What we've seen in the mini accelerated bear market in Bitcoin treasury companies is a shock between investors that thought that they were going to have extreme returns over 3 months. And some of them had, in fact, and some of them didn't. And in fact, some of the investors in Bitcoin treasury companies and Capital B were deceived by the euro and dollar share performance over the last months. But in fact, what matters over the long run is the number of Bitcoin per share increase, is the number of Bitcoin in the balance sheet. However, what I think companies have realized is that it needs to take into account the accretiveness, yes, in terms of Bitcoin per share, but as well in terms of not doing harm to the company when you raise capital. And I think that's been something where Capital B has excelled, is to raise capital with strategic investors that are focused on the long run, and to raise institutional capital with aligned investors and conditions that make sense both from a Bitcoin per share basis and on a Bitcoin outperformance over time, but as well on the fiat side, because investors expect fiat returns as well to outperform Bitcoin in certain time horizons to, at the end of the day, get more Bitcoin. And so I guess that there has been some learnings there in the last months, because when you enter Bitcoin, you make mistakes. When you enter Bitcoin treasury companies, you can also make mistakes. But the most typical mistake is to buy the top and sell the bottom. And so if you buy the top, but you also buy the bottom, over time, the bottoms last longer than the tops. And so it's like Bitcoin. You need to be there for the long run. It's time in the market, not timing the market. And it's painful, but you have to embrace pain, and you have to continue and focus on what is the best business model out there, which is the Bitcoin treasury company business model, to issue the best Bitcoin-backed equity and credit.
Alex, what do you think about traditional companies? Like, I'll just give you an example: Apple, Microsoft, and so on. Do you think that eventually they will have to capitulate and start getting Bitcoin into their reserves? Do you think that they will change their business models into Bitcoin? Like, how do you see this in this thesis of every company will become a treasury company? how do you envision like maybe the strongest players out there? How do you think the transition would look like?
Even if a company doesn't capitulate from a political perspective, its treasury will capitulate from its performance. And then Apple has already capitulated. Its last iPhone is orange. So I guess that every company will bend the knee to Bitcoin because it's literally the only money out there. Everything else is credit. And in that respect, yes, those companies have potentially a bit more to lose in the short term because they don't know what could happen to their stock price if people only start to measure their Bitcoin holdings and not the crazy multiples on their future earnings. But in fact, what will matter over the long run is which is the Magnificent Seven that will have the most Bitcoin on the balance sheet. And it's quite probable that it will be strategy before the existing ones.
Yeah, no, this is super interesting. Actually, you just said something that caught our attention. Could you please go a little bit deeper in Bitcoin is the only money, everything else is credit?
Well, the question that you typically get from a newcomer in Bitcoin is what backs Bitcoin? Well, the answer is Bitcoin is backing everything because it's the most decentralized and secure network in the world. And so that is the backing. It's the actual network over the world that you cannot copy. And in this respect, it is also what with the link with the actual energy in the world, the equivalent of 21 nuclear reactors. It is exactly what allows for the fixed supply, and there is no other asset on earth with global accessibility that has a fixed supply. And so in this sense, if you don't have a fixed supply, then it's credit because everything else can be printed out of thin air, at least the things that are globally accessible and with global demand. The alternatives today is to lose your money in euros, to lose your money in dollars, to lose your money in monetary funds. And so in this case, you might as well buy Bitcoin and not have all of your assets in euro like Europeans do. Because, today, still 95% of people, they would have a portfolio with 90% in euro or in euro stocks that have no exposure to Bitcoin. All of this is going to zero over time. And as Michael says, the power and the influence of all of this capital that is going to zero is at the end of the day going to be transferred to Bitcoin, Bitcoiners, Bitcoin treasury companies, and the institutions that adopt it.